So it's just Ruth Zive. I'm going to introduce Jeff in a little bit. I head up marketing for a company called Blueprint, and we are a gold sponsor here at CA World. We're very excited to be a gold sponsor. And I'm here to talk to you today a little bit about how one of our customers, a large enterprise, leveraged Blueprint alongside CA Agile Central using a scaled Agile framework to really drive Agile at scale. Jeff's going to speak to that story, and before he does, I'm going to give a little bit of context so you can understand what we're seeing with our customers, what we're seeing in the market, and some of the trends that we've identified and how they're being addressed. And then Jeff will share really a case study along those same lines. So, what do we see in the market? What we actually see is that there's been a pretty significant and radical transition from first generation Agile, where teams are small, products are pretty straightforward, those same teams are co-located, they can work inside of a room with a whiteboard and sticky notes, and they're really able to drive some material speed within their development cycles. But as organizations and large enterprises in particular have this imperative towards digital transformation, they want to scale that up. And that's been particularly challenging. And what they've prioritized in driving Agile at scale is this notion of business and IT alignment, that as products become more complex and teams become more dispersed and organizations are constrained by things like regulations, it's really difficult to keep the business interests and those overarching objectives very tightly aligned to more downstream development deliverables. And that is absolutely a priority for Agile at scale. The other thing that organizations are addressing is this notion of automation, which traditionally is very much associated with development and operations, that traditional DevOps loop. Organizations have been fairly successful in driving automation and speed within that cycle. But up front in the SDLC, where a lot of the business planning activities tend to be very manual and labor intensive, there's not a lot of automation. And so what we're finding is that organizations are starting to look at that and how they can drive automation right out of the gate in those upfront planning activities. We actually worked with a market research firm called Tech Validate and conducted some research to understand what in particular some of those challenges are that large enterprises are experiencing as they try to drive Agile at scale. And what we found is that 90% of Agile practitioners are really finding this very challenging. It's not straightforward, even when they've had success at a smaller scale in that first generation of Agile. And they're finding some challenges around key areas. So one is relative to this lack of documentation or data persistence. When you have a small project or a small team and they're doing Agile and they're co-located, it's okay if the data is disposed. But when your teams are dispersed, when your products are complex, when you've got constraints and regulations to address, it's really important that you have the persistent data and that everything is kind of documented and that you can refer back to that, you can trace it, and even that you can reuse that over time. So that's a significant challenge for organizations as they try to scale Agile. Secondly, they're finding that there are significant bottlenecks at the front of the SDLC. So whereas they may be able to drive speed further downstream in development and operations, a lot of those upfront planning activities, the writing of user stories, the gathering of requirements, the writing of tests, those are very manual and require a lot of heavy lifting. And even something like user stories, it can take a lot of time to ramp your team as you transition to Agile, so that they're to a point where they're delivering very consistent and reliable and usable stories. And that tends to become a bottleneck for organizations. So that's a challenge as they try to scale up Agile as their resources are transitioning in their roles. And then lastly, there's a real challenge around aligning business and IT, as I said. That business has these overarching objectives, they articulate a need, and as those needs become more complex and the products become more complex, that overarching point of view is not sustained into the delivery cycle. And what organizations are finding is that what's being delivered is not actually what was intended by the business. So those are some of the challenges that our customers are experiencing, that large enterprises are experiencing. And I wanted to share with you just a little bit of a snapshot, and Jeff will speak as well about his own experience, but what are Blueprint customers realizing? So we surveyed some of our customers. The customers that we surveyed were using Blueprint alongside an Agile ALM tool. In many cases, that was CA Agile Central. And what they found was that Blueprint helped to drive significant benefits. So our customers find that there's an increase in speed of delivery by 50% or more. So that's even when they're using an Agile ALM tool, that we drive additional speed across that delivery cycle. 83% of our customers saw an increase in automation, and that's as compared to the automation benefits of using an Agile ALM tool alone. So when Blueprint was used in concert with that Agile ALM tool, they saw an 83% increase in automation, and those would be in automation activities up front in the SDLC. The quality of the deliverables improved for our customers, and over 30% of our customers saw a decrease in product defects. And what's interesting is that there are all kinds of studies that show the cost of fixing a defect up front in the earliest stages versus fixing a defect more downstream in production. I mean, it stands to reason that to fix that defect in the earliest business planning phase costs something like $50. To do it later in production costs, tens, even hundreds of thousands of dollars to make that fix on a defect. And then lastly, our customers found, 86% of our customers found, again, when using Blueprint alongside another Agile ALM tool, that business and IT were much more tightly aligned, which meant that when products were ultimately delivered, they were a much better reflection of what the business intended. That alignment was sustained across the SDLC, which meant that the deliverables were much more reliable and consistent and of better quality. So with that, I'd like to actually introduce, can I go backwards? Because I'd like to introduce Jeff. I'm going to refer to my notes because he has a very impressive history. So Jeff Hallett started out in GE's Corporate Research and Development Center, and he has over 25 years of experience in high assurance systems development and product creation as a software architect, an organizational leader, and a driver of operation excellence through TQM, lean, and agile practices and methodology. And most recently, Jeff served as a principal methodologist for lean and agile time-to-market procedures and practices at Electa. And he is going to talk about his experience there and share with you how he helped to drive agile at scale in that environment. So with that, I'll pass it over to Jeff.
Appreciate that. Can you guys hear me okay? Am I on? Okay, cool. All right, so first a little bit about the company. Like you said, it's basically a world leader in oncology treatment and treatment management products. So it's in the regulated medical device space. That's kind of an important point that we'll circle back on a little later. The company itself has grown by acquisition over about the last 20 years. So they probably have acquired roughly 13 different companies, several different products and product lines along that time. It is a globally distributed company between Sweden, the United Kingdom, the United States, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, and so on. And it is a mix of software and hardware. So we do have hardware products that we have included in our Agile transformation. And that's created some very interesting nuances along the way. The company's about 3,500 people, roughly 1,000 of those are in product creation. And product creation meaning testers, developers, product management, product owners, anyone directly affiliated with the actual creation of product, not just engineering. So basically, we started the Agile transformation about 4.5 years ago. We started it for a lot of the same reasons that probably all of you have. But one of our most important problems that we wanted to solve by going Agile was really around predictability. We wanted to make sure that we had very high confidence, and that what we said we were going to do, we actually were able to accomplish. The company wanted to get a lot more synergy out of the products that it had been acquiring over the years. So we had to make sure that certain capabilities across different product lines came together at the right time in the right way so we could get bigger solutions, to offer more comprehensive solutions to our customers. We also do have industry deadlines. There are regulatory deadline mandates, natural customer cycles and things like that do impose dates on us from the outside. And so we had to be able to be sure that at any time when we said we were going to do something, we had a very high confidence that we wanted to be able to do that. To that end, when we decided to go Agile, we did choose the Scaled Agile framework, SAFe. Any other SAFe people in the audience? SAFe practitioners, cool. And we did that specifically because we felt that SAFe offered a very good mechanism to make sure that we always maintained clear transparency and alignment during our Agile planning, from the strategic portfolio all the way down to the teams, regardless of where the team sat in the world. And then we could always roll that status back up and give ourselves confidence that we were doing what we said we were going to do, or allow us to take corrective action quickly to get back on track. So that's what we felt SAFe offered us. Now, one of the very key problems we faced immediately by going Agile, being a regulated industry, was really around the concept of compliance. We have to make sure that our products, as they're developed, we meet regulatory guidelines, FDA, MDD from Europe, other regulations around the world. And so compliance in our activities is something that absolutely could not be sacrificed in any way as we went Agile. And as people that are in the industry or in other regulated industries will know, compliance and fast change often are not happy bedfellows, in all fairness, right? So that was one of the first problems that we knew we had to tackle right up front. And we did it by making a very clear distinction between the information we manage in terms of product lifecycle, very distinctly from the information we manage as part of doing our work. The Agile framework gives us the way of doing work. We use Rally to do that, Agile Central to do that right from the beginning. But we knew that to manage the product lifecycle, we went ahead and latched onto this concept of the solution intent in the SAFe framework. Basically, the solution intent is the repository of knowledge, the knowledge base of all of the product components, from design input through design output. It basically maintains the entire design history for the products. And it also contains both aspirational, things that we want to do, as well as things we've already done, realized, results of the product development, activities. And so we knew we wanted to manage those distinctly, but we knew that those had to be managed somewhat together so that as we did our work in an Agile way, we knew that we would want our solution intent to evolve naturally, transforming things from variable to fixed, so that our solution intent was kind of in lockstep with the value that we were trying to deliver through the Agile practices. So kind of taking a look at the solution intent a little bit more closely for a second, we basically designed this thing by taking the general categories and types of information we knew we had to manage from a compliance perspective, and that we also knew added value to our own stakeholders. We didn't want anything in there that was just overhead or compliance only or regulatory only. We only wanted information in there that really added value to all of the product creation stakeholders. And we designed our solution intent, around those concepts, plus we also mimicked kind of the natural flow of idea from concept through actual product realization. So design input requirements into modeling the design, into realization, into testing and verification, and so on. So that allowed us to make sure that the solution intent could very clearly paint a picture for us and for any external auditors that we had to satisfy in terms of the sequencing, did we do the right steps in the right order? Do we have good design traceability from testing back into requirements? And again, the audit history was very clear, very unambiguous. It told a very good and solid story at all times. And that's probably one of the really key points, is that this has to be in place at all times, because an auditor can walk in the front door of your building at any moment and demand to do an audit. And you have to be able to stand up in front of that auditor and defend your objective evidence against the regulations. So this became really interesting. We wanted to be very agile, so we definitely wanted to avoid doing a lot of big upfront requirements, big upfront design. We only wanted to be elaborating requirements and design and those types of artifacts, to match the actual work and value we were doing right now. But on the other hand, we also knew that we wanted to avoid, compliance debt. We wanted to avoid the bow wave of compliance issues that would eventually slow us down at release time if we didn't make sure that every time we accepted work, it satisfied all the definitions of done needed to be fully compliant at that point in time. So we basically looked at this approach of saying that if we want to increment quickly, from an agile perspective with our features and stories, we have to have a way to increment quickly in terms of modifying the solution intent and maintaining compliance, which meant that we had to take a very profoundly different approach to thinking about compliance, how we manage compliance, and more importantly, how we manage the information and the information relationships that support our story of solid compliance. And that's where partners like Blueprint came in for us. We knew that one of the first areas that we had to tackle up front was requirements management. Those design inputs, having the stakeholder needs, design inputs, use cases, workflows, things like that, on a very solid foundation at all times was critical to making sure the rest of the design chain held together. So we partnered with Blueprint very early in our Agile transformation. Blueprint provided a system to us that allowed us to move to a more model-based approach. That allowed us to increment, a lot faster. It also gave a way for the product managers and product owners to have a more consistent method of expression, so that regardless of who was starting to define some of those requirements, they could be easily understood and transferred to design teams, regardless of where they were in the world. So that type of consistency, easily modeling, easy adaptive, easy change, and it became a single source of truth that any product owner, any product manager, any team anywhere could see the same set of requirements for the product at all times. And that was very, very powerful for us, being a very distributed organization, globally. They also were great in that they partnered with us to help develop an electronic signature system, so we could actually eliminate paper entirely from the requirements management chain. We could do everything completely electronically and only generate reports when we needed them for things like external submissions and those types of things as well. So it was really great, working with them. They helped us create this requirements repository that we could actually manage with all the rigor necessary. So when features started to come into proximity for PI planning, when it started to look like a feature was going to come in, the product managers and product owners could go into Blueprint, start to elaborate some of the high-level workflows, use cases, and that became a context for discussion around features at PI planning time. They could actually bring up these high-level use cases and workflows with the teams during PI planning, and that helped create a very strong level of understanding, shared understanding of what was actually being asked to be done, and that improved a lot of our estimation reliability and a lot of more confidence in the outcomes of the PI plan. Then kind of the agile mechanisms took over, and as the teams continued to discuss the features and stories, during the PI, that elaboration would then result in new information, potentially updates and changes that could be reflected back into Blueprint and the rest of the solution intent, and we would let the features and stories then drive the elaboration of the downstream specs and design, and eventually the testing, that followed up with that. That was good because it meant that we could keep all of our features and stories, all of our agile elements, lightweight and agile. So we could burden the things that were necessary for design control and the solution intent with the level of rigor that was needed to satisfy the compliance needs, but we could keep all the agile things light and agile. Since they are not requirements, they are not design, they are planning and work and collaboration driving elements, we would use them to do that. When they were accepted, they were discarded, they were transient, we got rid of them. We don't keep the stories and features, after they've been satisfied. It also keeps our agile management tooling out of the audit trail. So that means we don't have to do validation. We don't have to even put the tooling through that level of control. So that means if there's a new version of Agile Central that comes out, we can just take it. We don't have to go through a long an elaborate, work of validating a new version of product or something like that before we use it. And lastly, by keeping the number of things out of the audit trail, keeping the audit trail as simple and clean as possible, it does make the auditing a lot simpler, a lot more straightforward, and it tells a lot cleaner story, simply put. I mean, it's very hard, to extrapolate a big picture of, say, a design or requirements base if you're looking at 100 stories that have changed over several weeks than if you just have a nice, clean repository that tells that story by itself. So in short, basically, we went ahead and partnered with Blueprint to help us make sure we were getting that solid business alignment in terms of what kind of a product we felt we needed to do. And we were able to couple that with our use of Agile Central and CA to make sure that we had our continuous delivery through the Agile teams well structured, well aligned, and with higher levels of predictability that we had before. So kind of in summary, if you're really going to be delivering business value at the enterprise level, some type of enterprise class agility is really required to do that. And right sizing all of the activities that are part of your Agile framework and your product development framework is essential so that they don't create impedance mismatches and slow you down. We found that the Scaled Agile framework is a great way of doing this. We found it not only helped us with our business alignment and product focus, but it was very easy for us to interconnect other business processes like compliance, to make sure that we had a consistent working model across the enterprise and not just within product creation. And lastly, by using great partners like Blueprint and like CA, you can really build a best-in-class tool chain that helps you be a lot more effective in your Agile transformation and have confidence that you're delivering the business value you set up to do. So with that, I guess we have about 8 minutes if there are any questions.